You ever hear about a tractor so powerful it could literally throw a grown man over its own cab? I'm not talking about some freak accident or mechanical failure. I'm talking about a machine that was designed so aggressively, built with so much raw torque and power, that it became famous for launching its own operators through the air like ragdolls. Today, we're diving deep into the legendary Farmall Super M, a tractor that revolutionized American farming in the 1950s, but also developed a reputation that made farmers both respect it and fear it in equal measure. If you love stories about classic machinery, agricultural history, and the wild engineering decisions that defined an era, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now because we've got an incredible story to tell. The Farmall Super M rolled off the International Harvester production line in 1952, right in the middle of a farming revolution. This wasn't just another tractor, this was International Harvester's answer to farmers who were demanding more power, more capability, and more productivity from their equipment. After World War II, American agriculture was changing rapidly. Farms were getting bigger, fields were expanding, and the old ways of doing things just weren't cutting it anymore. Farmers needed machines that could pull heavier implements, plow deeper, work longer, and do it all faster than ever before. The Super M was i8's big swing at dominating that market, and in many ways it succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. But with that success came something nobody quite anticipated, a machine so brutally powerful that it would earn a dangerous reputation. Let's talk about what made this tractor special from an engineering standpoint. The Super M came equipped with a 264 cubic inch four-cylinder engine that produced around 45 horsepower at the belt and somewhere around 37 horsepower at the drawbar. Now, those numbers might not sound earth-shattering by today's standards when you've got tractors pushing 300 horsepower, but you have to understand the context. In the early 50s, this was serious power, and more importantly, it was serious torque. That engine was designed to lug, to pull, to keep churning, even when the load would make lesser tractors just give up and stall. International Harvester built this engine with low-end grunt in mind, and they succeeded. Why, the problem was that all that torque had to go somewhere, and when it hit resistance, things got violent. The real issue with the Super M wasn't the engine itself, but how all that power interacted with the rest of the tractor's design, particularly the hand clutch system. See, the Super M came with a hand-operated clutch as an option alongside the traditional foot clutch. This hand clutch was mounted on the right side of the steering wheel, and it was designed to give operators better control, especially when operating implements like loaders or belly mounts that required frequent engagement and disengagement. In theory, this was a great idea. In practice, it became the source of the Super M's most infamous characteristic. When you're working with heavy loads and you suddenly release that hand clutch while the engine is revved up and something catches or binds, the tractor doesn't just lurch forward. The entire machine can twist, buck, and if you're standing up or not properly braced, it can absolutely send you flying. Farmers started sharing stories almost immediately. There's the tale of a guy in Iowa who was using his Super M to pull a loaded manure spreader up a slight incline. The spreader hit a rock, the wheels locked for just a second, and when he popped the clutch trying to get over it, the tractor reared up just enough and twisted hard to the right. He went airborne, right over the hood, landed in the field 20 feet away. Broken arm, bruised ribs, and a lifetime of respect for that red machine. Then there was the operator in Illinois who was pulling stumps. He chained up to a big oak stump, revved the engine, and dropped the clutch. The stump didn't budge at first, then suddenly broke free. The shock sent him backward off the seat, but he grabbed the steering wheel on the way down. That probably saved his life because his feet went up and over, and he ended up dangling off the side while the tractor kept rolling. These weren't isolated incidents. The Super M developed a well-known reputation in farming communities across the Midwest and beyond. Old-timers would tell new operators, "You gotta respect that Super M, she'll throw you if you're not careful." The tractor became a rite of passage in some areas. If you could handle a Super M, you could handle anything. But the danger was real, and it wasn't just about operator error. The combination of high torque, a relatively short wheelbase for its power, and that hand clutch system created a perfect storm. When you add in uneven terrain, heavy implements, and the unpredictable nature of fieldwork, You had a machine that demanded absolute attention and respect. Let your guard down for 1 second, and the Super M would remind you who was boss. International Harvester was aware of the stories, but they also knew the Super M was a sales success. Farmers loved the power and capability, even if they acknowledged the risks. IH did make some changes over the production run. They updated the seat mounting, added better operator platforms, and improved the clutch mechanism slightly in later models, but fundamentally the Super M remained a beast. The company's position was essentially that the tractor was a professional tool that required professional handling. They published operator manuals with warnings about proper clutch technique, the importance of staying seated, and how to anticipate load changes. But let's be honest, farmers in the 50s were tough, independent, and often learned by doing rather than reading manuals. That combination of powerful machinery and hands-on learning led to plenty of hard lessons. The hand clutch deserves more explanation because it really was central to the Super M's wild behavior. Unlike a foot clutch where you're seated and using your body weight and leg strength to control engagement, the hand clutch required arm strength and often had operators standing, or half-standing, to get better leverage or visibility. This body position was inherently less stable. When the tractor bucked or lurched, there was nothing anchoring you to the machine. Your hand might be on that clutch lever, but the rest of your body was free to fly. Add to this the fact that the hand clutch could be engaged or disengaged very quickly, much faster than a foot clutch, and you had a system that could create instantaneous, violent reactions. Experienced Super M operators learned to brace themselves, keep their body weight low, and never trust the machine. But even experienced guys got caught sometimes. One of the most detailed accounts comes from a farmer in Minnesota who ran a Super M for over 20 years. He described it as the best tractor he ever owned and the one that scared him the most. He said you always had to think 3 steps ahead. If you're pulling something heavy, you don't just yank the clutch. You ease into it, feel the load, let the tractor settle into the pull. If something binds, you don't force it. You back off, assess, and try again. He admitted that in his first year with the tractor, he got thrown twice. Once he hit the steering wheel hard enough to crack a rib. The second time, he went sideways off the seat and nearly went under the rear wheel. After that, he developed a healthy fear that he said kept him safe. He learned to read the tractor's behavior, to feel through the controls when something was about to go wrong. The Super M's power also made it a favorite for custom work and particularly demanding jobs. Guys who did silo filling, heavy plowing, or big hay operations sought out the Super M, specifically because it could handle workloads that would kill other tractors. But this also meant it was often pushed to its absolute limits, which is when the dangerous behavior was most likely to show up. There are stories of Super M's being used in tractor pulls even back in the day, informal competitions where farmers would see whose machine could pull the most weight. The Super M regularly embarrassed bigger, newer tractors. But pull events also led to some spectacular operator launches when things went sideways. One guy reportedly got thrown so hard at a county fair pull that he landed in the spectator area. Fortunately, he missed the crowd, but it became local legend. What's fascinating is how the Super M's reputation has evolved over the decades. Today, these tractors are highly collectible. Restoration enthusiasts love them. Tractor shows feature them prominently, and they command serious prices at auctions. Modern collectors appreciate the raw mechanical nature of the Super M. The fact that it's all metal and muscle with no electronics, no computers, just pure mechanical force. But even today, people who run restored Super M's will tell you the same thing farmers said 70 years ago. This tractor will humble you if you're not careful. There are YouTube videos of vintage tractor demonstrations where you can see a Super M buck or lurch. And even with modern operators who know the machine's history, you can see the surprise and adrenaline on their faces. International Harvester's legacy with the Super M is complex. On one hand, it was exactly what they intended. A powerful workhorse that helped American farms become more productive during a critical period of agricultural expansion. It sold well, it worked hard, and it earned IH a reputation for building serious farm equipment. On the other hand, the safety issues and the stories of thrown operators were a black eye for the company. There were lawsuits, though nothing that significantly impacted IIH's business. The bigger impact was on how future tractors were designed. The industry as a whole started paying more attention to operator safety, to how power was delivered, and to the ergonomics of controls. You can draw a direct line from the Super M's wild behavior to modern features like rollover protection structures, safer clutch designs, and better seating systems. The culture around the Super M also tells us something about how farming has changed. In the 50s and 60s, there was an acceptance of risk that we don't see today. Farming was dangerous, everyone knew it, and getting hurt was just part of the job. Tractors didn't have cabs, no seat belts, no roll bars on most models. You learned to be tough and careful, or you didn't last. The Super M embodied that era perfectly. It was a tool that demanded respect and skill, and if you didn't bring both, you paid the price. Modern farming still has risks, but the approach to safety is completely different. Today's tractors are designed with operator protection as a primary concern, not an afterthought. The Super M represents a time when the machine came first and the operator had to adapt. Let's talk about some specific design elements that contributed to the problem. The Super M's wheelbase was relatively short compared to its power output. This made it maneuverable, which farmers appreciated, but it also meant the tractor had a shorter pivot point when torque was applied unevenly. If the rear wheels caught traction suddenly, or if one wheel had more grip than the other, the whole tractor could twist on its axis. The center of gravity was also fairly high, especially when combined with certain implements or when operating on slopes. This made the tractor more prone to rearing up or tipping in extreme circumstances. The fenders and operator platform, while functional, didn't provide much in the way of protection or secure footing. If you were standing or even half-seated, there wasn't much keeping you on the tractor when it decided to move violently. Another factor was the era's maintenance practices, or sometimes lack thereof. A Super M that was properly maintained, with the clutch adjusted correctly and all the linkages in good shape, was more predictable than one that had been neglected. But farming is hard on equipment, and not every farmer had the time or resources to keep everything perfectly tuned. A clutch that engaged too quickly or inconsistently could turn an already powerful machine into something genuinely dangerous. There are accounts of Super M's with worn clutches that would grab so hard they'd chirp the rear tires even in dirt. And that kind of sudden engagement was exactly what sent operators flying. Regular maintenance could mitigate some of the risk, but it couldn't eliminate the fundamental character of the machine. The Super M also became part of farming folklore and oral tradition. Stories about the tractor were passed down, often growing more dramatic with each telling. There's probably some exaggeration in some of the tales, but the core truth remains. This was a tractor that could and did throw people. It became a measuring stick for toughness and skill. Old farmers would size up younger ones by asking if they'd ever run a Super M. The answer told you a lot about someone's experience level and their tolerance for challenging equipment. In some communities, being able to handle a Super M was a badge of honor, proof that you were a real farmer who could manage powerful equipment under tough conditions. Yet the tractor's performance in different soil conditions also played a role in its behavior. In loose or sandy soil, the Super M might just spin the tires when you dump the clutch. Annoying but not dangerous. But in sticky clay or on firm ground where the tires could really bite, that's when things got exciting. The tractor would transfer all that engine torque directly into forward motion or twisting force, and if you weren't ready, you were going for a ride. Experienced operators learned to read the ground conditions and adjust their technique accordingly. Wet clay meant you feathered the clutch carefully. Firm summer ground meant you really had to be braced. Ignoring these lessons usually resulted in a painful reminder from the tractor itself. International Harvester continued to build on the Super M's foundation with later models, but they also learned from the feedback and the incidents. Subsequent tractors had improved operator stations, better clutch designs, and more attention paid to how power was delivered to the ground. The industry as a whole moved toward more operator-friendly designs, though there was always a tension between making a tractor safer and making it powerful enough to do the work. The Super M exists at that intersection, a machine built primarily for capability with operator comfort and safety being secondary concerns. That approach defined an era, but it also ensured that the Super M would be remembered as much for its wild character as for its work capacity. Today, if you attend a vintage tractor show and find a Super M, take a moment to really look at it. Appreciate the simple, robust engineering. Notice the hand clutch lever if it's so equipped. Imagine what it must have been like to operate this machine day in and day out, knowing that it could turn on you in an instant if you made a mistake. Talk to the owner if you can. Chances are they'll have stories, either personal experiences or tales passed down from family members who ran these tractors in their working days. Those stories are a window into a different time in American agriculture, when farming was even more physically demanding than it is now, and the equipment was as tough and unforgiving as the work itself. The Farmall Super M threw operators, broke bones, and created legends. It also plowed millions of acres, pulled countless loads, and helped feed a growing nation. That's the complicated legacy of a truly remarkable machine. Yeah, what's really interesting to consider is how the Super M changed the conversation between farmers and manufacturers about what responsibility looked like. Before the Super M gained its infamous reputation, most farmers just accepted that powerful equipment came with inherent risks. It was the operator's job to figure out how to handle it. But the sheer number of incidents and the severity of some of the injuries started forcing manufacturers to think differently. They realized that building a powerful machine wasn't enough. They had to think about how humans would actually interact with that machine under real-world conditions, not just ideal circumstances. This shift in thinking didn't happen overnight, but the Super M was definitely part of the catalyst that pushed the industry toward better design practices overall. The interesting thing about power delivery systems is that they're not just about horsepower numbers on a spec sheet. It's about how that power gets translated from the engine to the ground and how quickly and violently that translation can happen. The Super M's hand clutch allowed for very abrupt engagement, which meant you could go from zero load to full load almost instantaneously. That shock load is what caused the dramatic reactions. Modern tractors have more sophisticated clutch systems, some with gradual engagement mechanisms that smooth out the transition. They also have better weight distribution, lower centers of gravity, and operator platforms designed with restraint systems in mind. All of these improvements trace back, at least in part, to lessons learned from tractors like the Super M. If you think about the physics of what was happening when a Super M threw an operator, it becomes clear why modern regulations exist. When a tractor is pulling a heavy load and something suddenly changes, there's an enormous amount of stored energy that has to go somewhere. In a short wheelbased, relatively light tractor like the Super M, that energy often manifested as rotational force around the tractor's axis point. Imagine the tractor as a lever with the pivot point being somewhere near the center. If the front end suddenly gets lighter while the back end has massive traction, the front can come up off the ground. If there's uneven weight distribution side to side, the tractor can twist. An operator standing or loosely seated and not expecting that motion has nothing to hold them down. Newton's first law of motion says an object in motion stays in motion. The tractor changes direction violently, but the operator just keeps going in the original direction, which means they go flying. There's also the human factor that can't be overlooked. Farmers in the 1950s and 60s were working long hours in hot conditions under significant pressure to get work done. Fatigue affects judgment and reaction time. When you're tired and stressed, you're more likely to make a mistake with the clutch, to not brace yourself properly, or to fail to anticipate a problem that your fresh self would have seen coming. Add the fact that many farmers were working in unfamiliar or particularly challenging conditions, maybe dealing with worn equipment or trying to push through despite weather or ground conditions being less than ideal, and you had a perfect recipe for incidents. The Super M wasn't making mistakes, but it was certainly punishing the mistakes that tired, stressed humans were making. Community response to the Super M's reputation varied quite a bit depending on where you were. In some farming regions, the tractor was almost celebrated for its raw power and its refusal to be tamed. It represented a certain kind of agricultural independence and toughness. The stories of operators getting thrown weren't seen as design failures, but as proof that the tractor was serious equipment for serious farmers. In other areas, the Super M developed more of a cautionary reputation. Parents would warn their kids, "Make sure you respect that machine. Experienced operators would reluctantly help younger farmers learn how to handle one properly, passing on hard-won knowledge about proper technique and the importance of constant vigilance. This dual reputation persisted even as the tractor aged and farming practices evolved. The economic side of the Super M story is worth considering too. International Harvester priced the Super M competitively, and farmers saw them as an investment that would pay for itself through increased productivity and capability. When you could pull heavier implements or work faster, you could take on more work or complete your own work more efficiently. That economic incentive meant that farmers were willing to tolerate a certain amount of risk. Yes, the machine was dangerous, but it also made money. That calculation is interesting from a historical perspective because it shows how economic pressures shaped farming practices and technology adoption. Farmers understood the risk but made the choice to operate the Super M anyway because the benefits outweighed the cost in their estimation. As for International Harvester as a company, the Super M represented a particular moment in their history. They were confident, growing, and willing to build equipment that was designed for capability first. The company had survived the Depression, had prospered during and after World War II, and was in an expansive mindset. The Super M wasn't a mistake in their view. It was exactly the kind of powerful, capable equipment that American farmers needed as the country was growing and agriculture was industrializing. If there were safety concerns, well, that was part of the reality of farm work. It would take decades and major shifts in regulatory thinking and cultural attitudes toward safety before manufacturers would start prioritizing operator protection at the same level as capability. One aspect of the Super M story that often gets overlooked is how it influenced operator training and education. While formal agricultural extension programs existed, much of the knowledge transfer about how to properly handle equipment happened informally, from experienced farmers to less experienced ones. The Super M created demand for this knowledge. If you were going to run one of these tractors, you needed to know how to do it right. This informal mentoring system actually worked pretty well in small communities, where knowledge could spread through personal connections. But it was less effective as tractors became more common and farming became more dispersed. Some of this gap was eventually filled by formal training programs and better manuals. But in the era of the Super M, you mostly had to learn from someone who already knew or learned the hard way yourself. The restoration and collector community surrounding the Super M today is quite extensive, and these enthusiasts often become the keepers of the tractor's history and legacy. Many vintage tractor shows and exhibitions feature Super M's prominently. The tractor clubs that focus on International Harvester equipment maintain documentation and oral histories of these machines. Collectors will spend considerable time and money bringing a Super M back to original condition. And part of that restoration process involves learning about the tractor's history and capabilities. This preservation effort ensures that the Super M's story doesn't get lost as the people who actually worked with these tractors daily pass away. Future generations will be able to see and potentially learn about these machines through the dedication of collectors and enthusiasts. There's also a certain romance to the Super M among people who appreciate mechanical simplicity. In an age of computer-controlled tractors with GPS guidance and automated systems, there's something appealing about a machine that's all mechanical, all straightforward. You can see the linkages, understand the systems, fix problems with basic tools. The Super M appeals to people who want to know exactly how their equipment works, who value the mechanical engineering, and who find satisfaction in maintaining and operating a machine that requires skill and attention. This aspect of the Super M's appeal might actually be why it's so popular today, even or especially among younger people discovering these tractors for the first time. The Super M story also fits into the broader narrative of American agricultural technology and how farming changed across the 20th century. The 1950s represent a pivotal moment when American agriculture was transitioning from small, diversified family farms to larger, more mechanized operations. Tractors were at the center of this transition, making it possible for fewer people to farm more land. The Super M was part of that wave of technological change. It represented the next step in power and capability that farmers needed to make that transition work. The fact that it came with some risk and required skill to operate safely didn't slow adoption, because farmers needed what it could do. If you were to rank all the farm equipment that changed American agriculture in the 20th century, the Farmall line of tractors would be right at the top, and the Super M represents the peak of that original design philosophy before things started changing. After the Super M, International Harvester and other manufacturers started incorporating more safety features and more operator comfort features as standard. The industry learned, slowly perhaps, but it did learn. That learning process was partly driven by incidents, lawsuits, and bad publicity. But it was also driven by this growing realization that operators were part of the equation that couldn't be ignored. You can't just build the most powerful machine possible and expect operators to adapt indefinitely. Eventually, you have to design with the operator in mind. The Super M's hand clutch in particular became something of a case study in how a single design feature could have outsized impact on safety. That one control element was responsible for much of the tractor's dangerous behavior. Later designs moved toward foot clutches with better progressive engagement, toward more foolproof control systems that couldn't create those violent, instantaneous transitions. The hand clutch didn't disappear entirely from farm equipment, but it became more refined, more carefully designed for the specific applications where it was used. This is the kind of iterative improvement that happens when an industry learns from its mistakes and its experiences, even if that learning is sometimes painful and comes at a cost. So here we are, reflecting on a tractor that's been out of production for decades, but that still captures people's imagination and still teaches lessons about the relationship between humans and machines. The Farmall Super M is a legend not just because of its power and capability, but because of what happened when that power met unprepared operators or moments of bad luck or inattention. It's a legend because it literally threw people through the air and they lived to tell the story. It's a legend because it pushed the boundaries of what was possible in farm equipment and refused to be tamed into something safe and comfortable. In a lot of ways, the Super M represents an era in American manufacturing when the attitude was build it tough, build it capable, and let the user figure out how to handle it responsibly. Thank you so much for watching and diving deep into this incredible piece of agricultural history with me. The Farmall Super M is just one of countless fascinating machines that shaped how we farm and how we live. If you're hungry for more stories like this, more explorations of the machines and the engineering decisions that defined eras, please hit that subscribe button. We've got so many more incredible stories coming, from bizarre farm equipment to manufacturing marvels to the wild decisions that sometimes had unintended consequences. Subscribe now so you don't miss any of them. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.